In this tutorial, I'm going to do a step-by-step walkthrough of deploying a static build of a React website to AWS. We're going to be building the sample application using create React app to make a sample React.js application. We're going to build that into a static site. We're going to put the static files onto an S3 bucket, and then we're going to use AWS Cloudfront, which is Amazon's CDN service, to cache the website on AWS's global endpoint regions. And then we're going to connect an SSL certificate that we make using AWS Certificate Manager into the CDN so that we can serve it on a custom URL using an SSL certificate. So it's going to be an HTTPS website. In order to do this, you will need a domain name, so you can go purchase one from another website, and I'll explain how you can get it into AWS, or you can just purchase one from AWS directly. All right, let's get started. Before we start, I just want to mention this. This video is a companion video to a blog post that I wrote. I'm going to link the blog post in the description, but if you go to whittington.blog, right now it's the first blog that I published. Here you can see it: deploy a static React site using AWS S3 and CloudFront. This is the exact same process that I'm going to be going through in the video. So if you'd prefer to read it in blog format, check out that link in the description. All right, in order to get started, we're first going to create a sample project using create React app, which means you need Node.js installed. If you don't have Node.js installed, you can just make a random static site to walk through the process. But I do plan on making follow-up videos where I automate this using GitHub Actions, which is why I'm starting with create React app and React now, so that I can have a build process set up later. All right, anyway, I'm using Node version 20, I think. Yeah, I'm running version 20, but any like relatively recent version of Node should work. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use npx create React app, and then I'm calling mine sample site. So this is going to be relatively slow for me. So I'm going to like fast forward past this. But if you've used create React app recently, it should be in your cache still and be relatively fast, but I'm going to have to fast forward this. All right, so create React app created the project. You can see here I have a sample site. Inside, it's like a standard Node.js project, a couple of React specific things in here. I went ahead and I opened it up in Visual Studio Code. In the package.json, you can see that they have a start script set up to run a dev server. Let's go ahead and do that. This should open up the project relatively quickly. The first time you run this, it's going to take a while for it to actually load up, 1 or 2 minutes, but then it's relatively quick in subsequent builds. All right, so let's change this a little bit. Let's just say all right, there you go. All right, so it says learn with Whittington. All right, so let's go ahead and stop that server. Let's go back into the package.json. You can see here that they have an eject, a test, and a build script. The build script is what will generate the static site. So go ahead and run that command, and that'll generate the static website that we can deploy. All right, this might take a while, so I'm going to fast forward until it's over. All right, so our static website has been built. If you go into the sample site folder, you'll see there's a new subfolder called build. If you click inside of that, you'll see that it's everything you need to host a static version of the React site. If you go ahead and you click index.html, you won't see anything impressive. It's just going to open a blank page. This is because it's not being hosted on a server. We're just opening that one page. So when it tries to pull in the JavaScript and the CSS and all the icons and stuff, none of that will actually load because we're only giving access to that one file in the browser. So this is all we need to do our sample site deployment. So next we're going to be jumping into AWS Management Console. Okay, so now that we have the static output of our create React app project, that is enough for us to do a test deployment. So from this point forward, we're only going to be configuring stuff inside of the AWS Management Console. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up two S3 buckets. So the first S3 bucket is going to be our primary domain. It's going to be this 0000.quest domain that I got for a penny. Don't judge me. And then the second bucket is going to be www.zeros.quest. And the second bucket is going to serve as a redirect. So if anyone goes to the www subdomain of my site, some people might still want to do that. And it'll automatically redirect them to the primary site, and it'll be the exact same content. It's just like it'll remove the www from the subdomain, but all URLs containing that subdomain will still work and just forward to the original site. You could do this the other way around and forward your primary site to the www subdomain, but I don't like the way that looks, so I'm just doing it this way. Let's go ahead and create our first S3 bucket. All right, so I'm gonna name this one after the domain name. You kind of have to do this or it's gonna like break some stuff later on. And it just makes sense. If you're gonna host your files here for the domain name, just name it the domain name. And the region has to be US East 1. Apparently that's the only region where CloudFront can grab buckets from without some additional configuration. So just go ahead and put it there. If your users are elsewhere, it's fine, because the CloudFront CDN will put a local copy of the entire site in local endpoints all over the world, and the users will get the one that is closest to them. So it won't have any impact on your end users. All right, so because we're actually putting our files in this one, we're going to enable all public access and hit that acknowledge button. Just a quick warning here. This is the only situation where I would recommend doing this. You don't want your S3 buckets to ever be public. You want to heavily restrict access to your files, but because this is a static website and these files will be accessible to the public anyway, this is the one situation where it's okay to do this. Okay, all right, everything else is default. Add tags if you want them. Go ahead and create that bucket. We're not done. We have two more things to do. Let's go into the permissions. Again, make sure that this is all unchecked, and we're going to edit our bucket policy. So let me go ahead and copy this bucket policy. I'm going to give you a link where you can copy this bucket policy from a GitHub gist or something. So quick explanation of this. Bucket policy is like a list of security rules that you can define on your S3 bucket that defines rules for who and what other resources can access various features of your bucket. So in this one, we only have one statement, and the only thing we're worried about is the get object permission. Get object just means that the file can be downloaded. So what we're doing here is the effect we're allowing, and then principal is like who can do it. So the star wildcard means everyone. So everyone is allowed to call get object, which means that everyone can download files. And then we're limiting it to this particular bucket alone. So this just means it's a S3 bucket. And then this is the name of the bucket. And then the /* just means that this applies to everything inside of the bucket. So we're basically saying that everyone is allowed to download the files from this bucket, and that applies to every single file in this bucket because of that. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. This is what your bucket policy should look like. Again, I'll give you a link to that. It's also in the blog post that I mentioned earlier. And then we're going to go over to properties. We're going to change one more thing. We're going to go to static website hosting, and we have to enable this. So we're going to enable that, host a static website. We're going to use the redirect on the www subdomain bucket. So we're going to use index.html for this one because our build, our entry point is index.html. And as you see here, there's no error page. So we're not going to configure the error document because we don't have one apparently. All right, so hit save on that. All right, now we're going to go ahead and create the second bucket. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hit create bucket, and it's just going to be www.domainname. Again, this is required, and it has to be US East 1. We can leave the public access disabled because we're redirecting to the other bucket, and that one's set up. All right, so we're going to go ahead and leave that. And now we're going to have to configure this one more time. We're going to go into properties, and scroll all the way to the bottom, enable static hosting. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to use a redirect here, and we're going to switch this protocol to HTTP, and we're going to redirect to 0000.quest, which is our domain name. This will essentially kind of break this bucket's redirect feature until we set up the DNS records for the domain name. So we're going to go ahead and do that next. So just hit save on this, and then we're good with these two buckets. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into Route 53 and configure some DNS records. Okay, now that we have our buckets set up with their initial configuration, the next thing we're going to do is actually upload our static website files to the bucket. So we're going to go ahead and navigate to the bucket and just hit one of these upload buttons. And inside of your sample site folder, you'll see that there's a build folder that we mentioned earlier. You're just going to drag and drop everything inside that folder and hit upload. And it'll take a few seconds to validate that everything uploaded, but it should be relatively quick. All right, so now that that's there, we can go back to our properties and scroll to the bottom. And under static website hosting, they have this temporary URL. This URL will basically show you what it would look like if you go to the domain that we're going to configure next. So this is what the site is going to look like once we actually configure it to point to our custom domain name. Okay, now that our S3 buckets are set up to be statically hosting sites, the next step is to configure Route 53 and add some custom DNS records so that we can point our domain name to our S3 bucket. So navigate to Route 53. You can search for it in the search bar, click on it. We're going to need to do something with the hosted zones. We're going to have to create one. A hosted zone is basically, it's kind of like a resource associated with your domain name, and then it allows you to add custom DNS records to that domain name. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. We're going to create a hosted zone for our 000.quest. And it just needs to be public, and then you can add descriptions and tags if you want. All right, so this is where the extra step comes in if you didn't purchase your domain through AWS. So I purchased this 0000.quest domain from GoDaddy, which is why it's such a stupid domain. I got it for like a penny. All right, so what you're going to do if you purchased it elsewhere is you're going to look at this NS record, and you're going to just have to copy these name servers and set them as your name servers in your registrar for your domain that you're using. So I'm in GoDaddy. I'm just going to go ahead and copy these over real quick. Okay, so I just successfully updated the name servers. Something I want to point out about this, if you're doing this extra step, it does take some time for your name server update to propagate. So the next few steps we're going to be doing, where we're setting up the records to point the domain name to the S3 bucket, it might not work immediately. You might need to wait about 30 minutes for it to fully propagate. I'm going to try mine immediately and see if it propagates. If not, I'm going to cut the video to when it does propagate, and then we'll continue the tutorial. All right, so let's go ahead and create a record. We're going to have to create an A record, which is a DNS record that points to a resource. So leave the subdomain blank. This is going to be for our primary URL. We're going to use alias. This alias toggle allows you to configure DNS records that point directly to AWS resources. Makes things a lot nicer to configure. So here we're going to search for S3. Yeah, we're going to alias to S3 website endpoint, and then we're going to do US East 1 as our region, and then it should auto-populate with the S3 bucket. Right here is 0000.quest. And then that should be everything you need. Hit create record. And then we're going to create a second one for the www subdomain. So let's go ahead and click that, and then alias right there. Same thing, S3 web, the endpoint. Oh my god, bro. All right, there you go, US East 1. And again, you see here that it's pointing to the www bucket. And then you leave everything else and then just hit create records. Okay, now that those records have been created, assuming that my name server change has propagated inside of GoDaddy, I should be able to go to 0000.quest, and that should automatically route me to the S3 bucket. There's a good chance it hasn't been propagated yet, so that's why I'm putting it in the private. Shit. Yeah, so it hasn't propagated yet. I'm gonna come back once this has propagated, and then I'll continue the tutorial. Okay, I'm back. It took about 20 minutes for the DNS to propagate. If you are having issues with your DNS propagating, you can go to one of those DNS checker websites. I literally just use one called dnschecker.org. You type in your domain name, and then you switch to the NS record since that's what we're waiting to propagate. And as you can see here, in a lot of the regions, my name server record has not been updated yet, but at least one in the US has been updated, which is why I'm able to hit the endpoint. So yeah, if I go to 000.quest, I actually hit the endpoint, and it's on the domain. And if I go to www. Whatever, you see it forwards to the regular one. That is what happens when you set up the redirect bucket. So I just wanted to point that out real quick. All right, so this was the easy part, I guess, of the tutorial, just getting your site up and running with a URL. Unfortunately, you don't have an SSL certificate, so your website is going to look super sketchy if you send it to someone. They probably won't want to click on it. A lot of browsers will even block it. So you kind of need that SSL certificate. So let's go ahead and get that SSL certificate set up. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go and use AWS Certificate Manager, and we're going to configure an SSL certificate for our site. Okay, let's go ahead and create the SSL certificate that we will be serving on our site. So in order to do this, we're going to use AWS Certificate Manager. So if you come up here and you search for Certificate Manager or ACM, you should be able to navigate to this. And then under the Request Certificate tab, that's where we create one. So it's going to default to create a request a public certificate. Hit next. Here is an important step, because if you do this wrong, you're going to have to delete the certificate and it might mess up your CloudFront setup. So you want to make sure that you add both the www subdomain and the primary domain here. So add that, and then add the www subdomain as well. And then leave the validation method to DNS, because this is easier when we have the hosted zone set up. And then don't mess with the key algorithm, add some tags if you need them. Hit request, and then go to view certificate. So here now, we are apparently pending validation. Refresh this real quick. There you go. All right, so we're pending validation. So in order for us to validate, they want us to create 2 CNAME records for each of our domains that has these values in them. And because we have Route 53's hosted zone configuring our DNS records, we can just hit this create records in Route 53 button, and AWS will automatically configure it for us. So we go ahead and we hit create records, and it's going to take some time for this to actually become valid and get validated, but that's okay, because we have to go and configure CloudFront in the meantime anyway, and by the time we're done configuring CloudFront, this should be available for us. Okay, now that our certificate is valid, it's time to set up our CloudFront distributions. CloudFront distributions are basically just like a CDN configuration for a particular URL. So we're going to need 2, because we're using a www subdomain and the primary subdomain. All right, so also the certificate has been validated, so it is now good and ready to go. The validation status is there, and as you can see here, it's been issued, and Bing, please fuck off. Okay, so all right, let's go ahead and create our CloudFront distribution. So here we're going to use the S3 bucket name. So scroll to the top here, bucket. So for this bucket, we're going to go to properties and scroll all the way down. Under static website hosting, this URL here is what we're going to use. You could just select it from the dropdown based on the name here, but I personally feel more comfortable just copy pasting. Just throwing that out there. So a lot of the settings are going to be defaulted. So we're only going to change a few. This big one here is the viewer protocol policy. We're going to redirect HTTP to HTTPS so that all users will be accessing the secure version of the site. We're going to make sure that the caching optimize is selected here. We're going to have to, I'm going to disable the web application firewall. This is not necessary. It's a static site. It's not that deep. Here you can change your price class for your CDN endpoint caching. I'm just going to leave it to default because it's a tutorial. I'm not going to leave this up. Here, your alternate domain name, you have to add your domain name. The reason they're doing this is because when you create a CloudFront CDN, the CDN actually has its own URL. So we need to create a CNAME record, which basically establishes alternate URLs that can point to the same resource. So this is why we have to type our URL here, because we're pointing this domain name to our CDN URL. And we will also have to configure our DNS records to do that as well after this. All right, so also this is something you can change later, but every time you change it, it takes your site down for about 20 minutes because it has to redeploy the CDN. So here, I have my certificate from my other site, but we're only going to use the one for 000.quest because that's the one we're deploying right now. And then I just leave everything else default. Go ahead and create that distribution. Okay, that is valid. And now we're going to go ahead and create the other one. Let's filter so you don't have to see my blog thing filtering this. All right, so here, now we're going to go to the other bucket. And same thing, properties, scroll to the bottom, copy the URL. Again, you could just select the correct URL from here, but I prefer to copy paste because I'm a old man and I don't like to change my ways. All right, so you're gonna want to hit redirect HTTP to HTTPS. Validate that caching optimize is selected. Again, I'm disabling this. You can put it on if you want. I'm leaving that default, and then I'm adding the www subdomain here. All right, that, and then add my custom certificate here, and then that should be enough. Hit create distribution there. Go over to the distributions. All right, so as you can see here, they're still in their deploying state, but once they are done deploying, I should be able to go to this domain here or this domain here and still access the site, but it has to be fully deployed and available for that to happen. All right, so it looks like one of our CDNs has deployed. So the 000.quest1 is deployed. We haven't set up our DNS records to account for pointing to the CDN yet, so the actual URL won't work, but this domain name URL that has been generated for the CloudFront distribution, this should point us directly to our site. And as you can see, it does, and it is using an SSL certificate. That is the SSL certificate that we configured for our site already, is just using the wrong URL. This one is still deploying, which is fine because we still have to configure some stuff in Route 53. So now let's go into Route 53 and configure our DNS records to account for the CDN. All right, so we're back in Route 53 in our 000.quest hosted zone. As you can see, the two CNAME records that we needed for our DNS validation are still here. I leave those. You can go ahead and delete them now. Now that you've been validated, you no longer need them, but it's not really a big deal. It doesn't bother me. All right, so now we need to go ahead and update our A records to point to the CDN distributions that we configured instead of pointing directly to the bucket. So let's go ahead and do that for the 000.quest. Hit edit record, leave that default, leave that default. So we're no longer pointing to an S3 website endpoint, we're pointing to a CloudFront distribution. and it defaults to East 1. And yeah, it automatically selected the correct URL for us. And we're just going to go ahead and hit save on that. All right, now let's go ahead and edit the www record. Let's click that one, hit create record. Oh, nope, sorry. I did not mean to do that. I meant to hit edit record. God, I'm stupid today. All right, edit record. And again, leave that default, leave that default. It's now a CloudFront distribution, and it'll auto-populate for us, and then hit save. Okay, now if we go back to CloudFront, we can see that both of our CloudFront distributions have been fully deployed. They're no longer in this deploying state under the last modified section. So I already showed you that this one works. This one should work as well. Let's go ahead and see that. Yeah, as you can see, it pointed to the 000 .quest domain. So that is valid now. So if we go to 000.quest, we now see our website deployed with an SSL certificate. And if we go to the same version of this site, just with the www subdomain added, it'll automatically just redirect to the core site. All right, so that was the tutorial. Let me know what you think about it. Leave your comments. I'm gonna take down this probably so I don't get charged for it or whatever. But yeah, let me know what you think. Leave some comments.